And you know, since you just pointed to the 9/11 Commission report, there's an understanding that the primary motivation for 9/11 was U.S. support for Israel's brutal oppression of the Palestinians, also conveyed in the 9/11 Commission report. I guess my question is, how are these two incidents or theories, so to say, related? And, you know, there are those that will brush off your argument as a conspiracy theory. Are you concerned?
I don't think that's so much of a conspiracy theory. I was smiling when you said that because to tell a bit of a story on this. Back in the early '80s, when I was in Washington at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of our visitors for a luncheon talk was a young gentleman then named Francois Heisbourg. Heisbourg was the special assistant to French President Francois Mitterrand. And I don't know how the subject came up, but he said, you know, Americans never see conspiracies anywhere. We French, he said, we see conspiracies everywhere. And both of us are wrong. This is not a conspiracy in the sense that it is usually used, the word is usually used, which is to denigrate an opposing argument. When someone in the United States says that that's a conspiracy or that's a conspiracy theory, by definition they mean it is irrational, illegitimate, and without proof. All I would suggest to people is that you look at the films of WTC-7, that third tower going down on September 11th. You look and listen to the reports on September 11th with the secondary explosions. These are not fantasies, they happened. You look at the reports on September 12th of the apprehension of Israelis with vans of explosives and cameras filming the events on September 11. These are not fantasies. And you look at the people riddling the American government, all of the Middle East people in State Defense and the National Security Council, Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Douglas Feith, who used to be a friend of mine, by the way, from Philadelphia. These people were all part of the neoconservative movement. Many of these people are dual U.S.-Israeli nationals. All of their primary allegiance is to Israel.
In a recent article, Sabrowski explains why he is anti-Israeli. He notes, because of what it has done to the U.S. in the furtherance of its own goals. The USS Liberty incident and 9/11 obviously stand out. And because of the leverage it has acquired over the U.S. government and its policies through the machinations of the domestic Jewish community here.
My concern is that I don't much care about other people or other countries. I don't hate anyone in particular. I don't like anyone in particular. I'm an American. My loyalty is strictly to the United States. And I don't care what my ethnicity is or what my ancestry is. My allegiance is that. And my concern is only whether something helps or hurts the United States. And I think anyone who's a citizen of any country can very properly have similar feelings toward their country. What I'm concerned about is what is done to hurt America. And it is very clear that over a period of the last 40-odd years, that the penetration of the American political process, the effective subordination of the Congress in particular to Israel, when an Israeli prime minister can get 29 standing ovations from a Congress that can't give that much support to one of their own presidents, no matter how outlandish the statements, you have something as close to a puppet agency as you're going to find. Our policy in the Middle East has for decades been manipulated increasingly in terms of what benefits Israel and not what benefits the United States, even when that policy is articulated and supported by individuals who are sworn officials of the United States government. And to me, when a sworn official of the United States government, whether or not that person has dual Israeli citizenship, manipulates American policy, contrives crises and tragedies like 9/11, contrives wars like Afghanistan and Iraq, and now tries to get us into a war with Iran, all in the service of Israel, spending American lives in that process, they commit high treason, and they need to be treated in that manner.
In his article, Zionism Unmasked, the Dark Face of Jewish Nationalism, Sobrowski looks at the differences between Jewish nationalism, or Zionism, and that of other countries and cultures. He argues that, first of all, Zionism is a real witch's brew of xenophobia, racism, ultranationalism, and militarism that places it way outside of a mere nationalist context. Secondly, Zionism undermines civic loyalty. Thirdly, the enemy of normal nationalist movement is the occupying power, and perhaps its allies, and once independence is achieved, normal relations with the occupying power are truly the norm. But for Zionism, almost everyone out there is an actual or potential enemy. I continue our interview by asking him about his theory.
Well, I think the first thing to note, and I want to be sure that this is emphasized, is that Jewish nationalism or Zionism is not Judaism. It has nothing to do with Judaism. Many of the Zionists are very secular Jews. They are not practicing Jews in a religious sense. The thing that's intriguing about Zionism, and I think I use the phrase that it's a real witch's brew of xenophobia, ultranationalism, and militarism, with a nice scrap of regional imperialism built into it. Most nationalism is not like that. Most nationalism is intended to be a unifying force, but it doesn't go to such an extreme level. A second element of it is that when you have competing nationalisms, it's very, very rare to find anything that involves the level of antipathy and hatred to the other side.
Sobrowski believes that Americans should see where they stand now, what should be done, and where America must stand if it wishes to alter the world Zionism has contrived. While he paints a realistic picture of what the current situation is, he addresses why so many attempts to contain Zionism in the U.S. have failed throughout the years. You know, a good friend of the show, James Morris, who has contributed greatly not only to this show, The Autograph, but also in raising public awareness, notably on his website, AmericaHijacked.com. I remember him saying that he was a registered Republican for many years, but ultimately found it very hard as an American to relate to that party, or the Democratic Party for that matter, and became extremely frustrated, notably because of the government's support for AIPAC and similar organizations, and the United States support for Israel in general. Just recently, he was quoted as saying that he has become an independent. But I guess my question is, and my point is, that are we seeing more public awareness, more frustration inside the United States among Americans, because the ones that I talk to seem to be very, very upset, to say the least, and they seem to feel very strongly about this issue.
I think many Americans are finding it difficult to relate to their government, but the idea that there's any kind of a mass movement there because of the relationship to Israel is simply not the case. There is no vehicle for that type of opposition to have been created. There is not even an awareness on the part of most of the American people about the details of 9/11 that I mentioned to you. One of my last article was much more of a practical, how do we get the word out? And I think that if people did understand what had really happened at 9/11, you could very rapidly see a very substantial reorientation of public opinion.
Dr. Alan Sobrowski, thank you so much for those comments. So much more to talk about. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Hopefully, we will see you back on the Autograph next time here in New York City.
Susan, thank you very much. I sincerely hope I too could meet you there, and I'm only sorry that the missed plane connections didn't make it possible last night.